Welcome back. Well, as you might have heard in the national news, several flights were disrupted nationwide this morning after several major Canadian airports were issued bomb threats. Traffic eventually resumed. Here to discuss a few issues affecting travelers in our region is aviation industry analyst John Gradek at the McGill University in Montreal. And that's where he joins us from this evening. Good to see you, John.
Nice to see you.
Let's start with that bomb scare. Halifax not directly affected, but we know if you take one large airport out of the system in Canada, there's a cascading effect. What do we know about this?
Yeah, it hit 6 airports in Canada today at 6:30 this morning, Eastern Time. Ottawa, Montreal, it was Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. Surprisingly, Toronto wasn't hit, but it caused enough disruption and suspension of flights. Whenever you have one of these bomb threats, you go into an emergency mode and pull all services and all your staff out of the building. So these were 6 air traffic control centers that were targeted by the bomb threat, and that was one way to basically put a ground stop on operations into and out of those airports for about 2 hours this morning.
Yeah, about 2 hours, resolved fairly quickly. What does that tell us about the integrity of the system, as it were?
Well, this is standard procedure when you have things like this kind of disrupt the safety and security of the traveling public in Canada. And whether it's air, whether it's road, whether it's rail, bomb threats are taken very, very seriously. And you saw this morning the speed by which that action was taken by both NAVCAN, whose facilities were directly targeted by the bomb threat, and by the investigating authorities. The authorities had the responsibility to examine the threat and assess the threat, and to provide direction to NAVCAN as to when it was safe for NAVCAN to basically come back and bring those operations back into play.
Right. We don't know who did it yet. We'll certainly be continuing our reporting on that. Yesterday, we had a report on this broadcast that Quebec carrier Pascan, a small airline, is ending its route between Sydney and Halifax. Boy, there was a lot of fanfare when this launched, because it's one of those regional airports where, really they've been struggling since the pandemic, and since airlines in this country have gone to larger aircraft for routes and not doing as many smaller routes. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think you've seen Air Canada kind of scale back its operations in terms of looking at, the jet services into the Maritimes. They're now using more turboprops from Jazz and from PAL to fly into regional airports into Eastern Canada. WestJet has abandoned Eastern Canada for all intents and purposes. In terms of intra services, they still fly to and from Calgary. But if you're trying to get from St. John to Yarmouth, or from Halifax to Bathurst, you're stuck. You don't have any services. Yeah. So Pascan was really, an interesting player in the game. They launched services to Bathurst, St. John, and Sydney with great fanfare last year. I think Bathurst only lasted about 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and now we see, the airport in Sydney being affected. I think the problem with Pascan, in my opinion, is really the airplane type. They were using, 32-seater SAB aircraft, which to me is probably too big. It's probably too big for that market. They have some smaller airplanes, some British Aerospace aircraft that are 17-seaters, 19-seaters. That would probably be the better type of aircraft to fly into these regional routes. 32 seats twice a day seems to be a lot of capacity. Right. So maybe we can have the politicians and our local administrators go back to Pascan and ask for smaller airplanes, and hopefully they have them available.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Air travel's been under the microscope. The federal government wants more competition to lower prices, it says. The airlines say, well, if you want lower prices, you got to drop the fees, things like landing fees. Who's right?
Yeah, that's been the bane of WestJet's existence over the last year. I think they've been making some noise about, the high cost of fees in Canada. Yeah, and the fees are high. You look at transportation costs. You look at, landing fees. You look at transportation taxes. You look at, CATSA fees. and you have the infamous airport improvement fees that are, $35, $40 per passenger. So yeah, so the fees are significant, especially if you're flying smaller regional routes. Yeah, so there is a point that, my view is that we don't need some of these fees for some of the smaller regional routes in Canada. Leave them in there for the long haul routes, Halifax, Calgary, and Halifax, Amsterdam, as you know. But yeah, I think that, you have to make sure that, you provide all tools available in order for these carriers, smaller carriers, to survive and to keep prices low. So anything to be done to reduce the overhead associated with taxation and fees will be more than welcome in these smaller regional markets.
Earlier in the newscast tonight, we talked about how Halifax Stanfield has just unveiled a new international arrivals terminal so passengers can connect directly to domestic flights. How will that help the airport? Will it help the airport? Could that land more international flights to the East Coast?
I think so. I think that, that whole process of when you fly in internationally, you have to clear customs in Halifax, pick up your bag, and then recheck your bag into your domestic or a U.S. connection. I think what they've done in Halifax is great news for connecting passengers coming in from international services. So it really is a feather in the cap for, the use of Halifax as an international gateway and to facilitate the transit of passengers through Halifax Airport.
John, we saw the airlines in this country pivot when Canadians decided to stop traveling to the U.S. in the same numbers in previous years. Do you think we're going to see more of that? Do you see those American routes returning, or do you think some of these now have switched over for good?
I think this trend is going to continue for a while. I don't see I don't see the debate, in the U.S. on Canada-U.S. relations taking any turns for the better over the next little while. I think Canadians have responded quite well to the refocus that the Canadian airlines have done to promote Canadian travel within Canada and internationally as well to Europe and Asia. So I think that the trend will continue. We're seeing drops of about 30 to 40% in terms of traffic to and from Canada to the U.S. We've seen dozens of flights canceled by both WestJet and Air Canada to and from the U.S. So the message has been loud and clear to the governments and to the airline industry that Canadians have much less of an interest in flying to the U.S. We'd rather fly domestically or internationally, and that trend will be.
Yeah, and JetBlue, which was supposed to start a flight from Boston to Halifax, has decided to hold off for another year. So we'll have to see how that plays out. John Gradek, always appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you for helping us out tonight.
Todd, have a great day. Take care.
You too. We'll take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.